Hey everyone, I'm Jenny Shu, CEO at Talofa Games, and I'm really excited to chat with you all about data-driven play, how digital native developers redefine game analytics. Today's chat will be pretty much about my experience starting a game studio. It'll be a lot about my journey, but also I'll take you all into the data-informed process to how we build games here at my studio. So I hope it's very practical. I've been running this studio for about 6 years now, and I've been building games since I was 12. So a lot of these lessons I've accumulated over the last 16 years now of building games. Cool. So yeah, this is the talk, and I am Gen Z. So a lot of the insights I'll be sharing with you all are about digital native developers and digitally native players, which I am using as a fancy word for Gen Z, this new generation. So I have 5 different lessons here when it comes to how I think about building games and how I use data in the process of building the games. So I'm a computer scientist, so that's why all the lessons here are 0 indexed. So one quote I heard from a founder friend of mine that always sticks with me now is that he said that he was scared of Gen Z. And I thought that was really funny since I myself am Gen Z, and I did not understand why he was afraid of me and my generation as a whole. But when it came down to it, what he really meant was he doesn't understand how this generation works and how to build games and experiences that actually make Gen Z happy or Gen Z would enjoy. So I thought a lot of this presentation would help explain how I even went about the process of understanding my own generation and how that data can also help people outside of Gen Z understand a little bit more about Gen Z. So I'll take you all through my background and how I, as a Gen Z person, came into building games and my process of starting the studio. And that'll tie nicely into how I learned how to use data and analytics, how to determine what games we make. But first, thought I'd just take you all on a little bit of a journey back to kind of how this all got started. So I've always really loved a whole bunch of different things, everything from running to I'm a really bad dancer, dance groups in college to boxing. I owned chickens at some point. I grew up in the Bay Area here in California. So I've always kind of had this like very smattering of different interests. And I think that was due to the invention of the internet and growing up with like smartphones and all of that very readily available. And some of my first games growing up were Pokemon, Neopets, Super Smash Bros. And I used to play video games like under my desk. I had my Game Boy Micro and I would play the games like in the middle of class. So it was very, very much a passion of mine since I was very little to love playing games. And this is true for a lot of Gen Z as well. So my experience will closely mirror, I think, a lot of what the digitally native generation has grown up doing. So when I was about 10, 11 years old, I heard of this site called deviantart.com. And this is actually where I got my first taste of analytics, because I posted my first pieces of art here and they got like 10 views and I was very happy. Like I think the fact that even 10 people would look at my art was a sign that everything I did was at least affecting someone out there. And I was a very, very quiet and introverted kid. So the fact that I was getting the attention of even 10 random strangers was a thrill like no other. And I really loved posting fan art of Neopets, Pokemon, these games that I grew up loving. I would put art online, and essentially what I did was I started realizing like some of the art would get more views than others. And this for me was like a sign that, like maybe people want more of that thing that I drew, that art, that community of people who love Pokemon. Maybe they'll like other stuff I do. So that was my first taste of like kind of trying out different stuff, seeing what actually got people's attention and then doubling down there. And that led me to using this program called Flash, Adobe Flash, to make animations. And the animations art I made essentially turned those static drawings into living, breathing animations. And that process actually helped me dig even more into the idea of like what people liked online, because I realized that my animations got more views than my art. So then I started digging more into like what is Flash, what is animation, and also what is can I take this further? Essentially, can I go from art to animation to games? So I essentially realized like Pokemon art did very well online. Like all of the Pokemon fan art I drew was getting like 1 like, 2 likes, 3 likes, up to like 10 likes. And I was compared to my Neopets art. So I was like, okay, there's like something going on here. I should make more Pokemon things. I love Pokemon. A lot of people out there love Pokemon. So my first game that I made was this game called Catch the Pokeball. Terrible game. All you did was you clicked on a Pokeball and you win before the time runs out, and the Pokeball is flying around very fast. So I learned how to code on my own. I essentially took a lot of the copy pasted code from online that I found on different websites, and then I put them into Flash, and suddenly I had an interactive experience. So that's where the first idea that I could be a game developer started to take root in my mind. From there, I got a lot better at coding. So I started making more and more games, and I would essentially learn 1 line of code and then make a game based off of that. So everything from a version of Mario Brothers with Pikachu as the protagonist to dress up games to platformers, basically you name it, I turned it into a Pokemon fan game. So I just knew that like people out there love Pokemon stuff. So I was making a lot of stuff just to get the clicks, to get the likes. And of course, it helped me a lot because I had started to grow a online community when my real life communities were lacking. Like I didn't have a lot of real life friends. So like online was where I found my people. And that turned into me making more and more games. So as you can see, as my art got better, my games got more and more complex. So everything from like tug of war to a game about like DDR, like a dance game, to like a Flappy Bird like game. Like I pretty much made it all. And I started doing some non-Pokemon related stuff because at a certain point, like it's good to be original. And I also didn't want to just be a game developer that made Pokemon games. So I started branching out a little bit more. At this point, from age 12 to 18, I made 100 games. So it was a lot of 1 day, 2 day, 3 day games. And I would basically force myself to put it out there, even if it was ugly, even if it was half done. And I was a 1-person studio. So I was just doing the art, animation, coding, marketing, all of it myself. So I didn't have time to necessarily dwell on a single game for too long, especially if it didn't do well, like if it didn't get likes, views, comments. So what that turned into was me making even all these original titles. So I started making my own worlds. I realized I was very into horror games. And essentially what I did was I took my most popular Flash games, which are games you play online, and ported them to mobile because mobile games were easier to play. Everyone has a phone. So I realized I could just look at what games got the most views, traction, virality on web. And Flash games are easier to build and deploy. Then take the most popular ones, like maybe out of the 20 I make in the web, I take 1 and put it on mobile. So these were some of the games I made that were totally original. I had one that was like a crime detective game, and I really liked horror. So I made a game about essentially like escaping the room, like puzzle, like can you figure out where the like secret key is, and maybe there's like a scary monster that'll jump out at you. So it's that ended up being like my primary genre of game was like horror and comedy, because I'm also somebody who's really afraid of horror movies. Like I cannot actually watch a horror movie because I'm too scared. So it's just like really ironic that I ended up making a lot of horror games. But it's actually because I realized Gen Z as a like generation actually really loved horror, and I was very committed to like building games that I knew people loved. So I got really good at making horror games, though I was very scared of them. And that's why I added like the comedy piece, because I realized for myself, if it didn't have a little bit of humor, it was like way too scary to even build. So that turned into me essentially like after making the 10 mobile games, I made 10 mobile games out of the 100 Flash games I built. And so, yeah, basically 10% of the games that I made for online ended up turning into mobile games. And out of those 10, about like 20% of them really took off. So it kind of gets smaller and smaller, the chances of like success, and each stage I used to inform the next. And those that did really well, like the 2 or 3 games, they ended up getting 10 million downloads, help pay for college. So it was like worth it to like ruthlessly cut those 100 babies of mine to 10, to 2, and then those games helped pay for college. So I ended up going to MIT to study computer science, and also got recruited there to run cross country and track and field. So I was very into sports, but I was also into games. And that turned into me when I was in my junior year of college. I actually got into the Forbes 30 under 30 list. And for that, especially at MIT, somehow everyone learned about it. They learned about the fact that I made all these games, and like I was working under an anonymous title online. So nobody knew that me, Jenny, was the same person that made all those weird horror games online. So suddenly like worlds collided, and I went from like a anonymous game developer online to this face and this person who made games. And that turned into me realizing that the game development industry is like a whole industry. Like there's some people here that are the first people I ever met in game development. So I started thinking more of like, is game development an actual career? How do I take the games that I had made as I was a child to maybe doing this full time and starting my own studio? So that thought started to emerge in my mind, but it seemed too hard. Like starting a studio was something I did not know how to do, because I myself had only made games as a single person. And that turned into me after college trying to actually do games full time. Like I thought I'd give it a go. I ended up participating in this contest that Niantic, the company behind Pokemon Go, started. So they had a contest, they had a call for developers to make games that combine fitness and gaming. And I thought, like, that's perfect. Like, that's exactly what I've been doing. The 2 things I've loved the most in my entire life, but I've never combined them. So what happened was that I asked the 2 people that I knew would not say no to doing this contest with me, because they had a minimum team size of 3. Like you could not participate without 3 people. I asked and they said no. So I just ended up submitting 2 people with me on the application, and I didn't tell them. And when we ended up getting in, I told my dad and my brother that they had to do this contest with me. And luckily, they were all on board. We ended up submitting our very silly idea of like, it was a social running game where like if you didn't run, you like turned into a potato. It was very silly. And the idea ended up winning the whole contest. So that was like the moment at which it went from like, can I build games, to I just got a check of $300,000 and I can do whatever I want with it. And like that amount of money for me, like just was my sign, like I can do this. And maybe it's time to give like running my own studio a go. So my first lesson here is, don't be scared of Gen Z. If they're like me, they grew up playing games, growing up in the era where there's internet communities around things like art, games, like more accessible games, mobile games, and also new genres, like things like horror really starting to take over platforms, contests. Like there's new ways of getting into games. And I'd say it's a generation that grew up with evolving platforms and types and genres of gameplay. So my next lesson here is just taking a step back, like Gen Z as a whole. what's some information here that we can use to determine what Gen Z likes, how to build product games for Gen Z. So Gen Z is defined by this group of people born 1997 to 2012, and it's the largest generation ever. And Gen Z is starting to age into a place where they can actually spend money. So a lot of people use TikTok. It's a very large group that's emerging. So it's a lot of the new generation of people who will spend, play, all of that. So it's very important to understand what matters to Gen Z. And Gen Z, if you look at the top apps that they use, Roblox, Minecraft, TikTok, there's like a trend of like these apps that people use are really just games on the inside. Like Be Real is a game where you try to post a photo at the same second every day across the world. TikTok is a game because they've gamified the algorithm and how you see content. Roblox is a game of games. There's a lot of games on the platform, and Minecraft is a game, but it's a creative game. And I would say I see a question about what my favorite game is now. And I would say my favorite game now is Just Dance. It's a game that gamifies dancing. I'm a terrible dancer, but I'm okay at Just Dance. So I would say I definitely had a phase of Minecraft. I definitely had a phase of Fortnite. So there's a lot of these like games that are natively Gen Z that I also myself have dabbled in at some point. But if you want to target Gen Z, like definitely think about it as like they need to be entertained no matter what it is, whether it's education, it's fitness, which obviously is what I'm very interested in, or it's just like scrolling their social media feed. And some trends and my personal experience, things that I see really starting to take off is in some surveys done on Gen Z, like some of the top things that keep coming up are healthy eating, mindfulness, stress, anxiety management, breath work, mindful movement, like these things. And that really maybe 10 years ago weren't talked about as much. But if you look on TikTok, if you look in surveys, like these things are just starting to rise in terms of the focus of people and what they really care about. And what I've found is linked, and this is proven in lots of studies in my personal experience, is that when you just start to slip a little in your mental health, you have a pretty drastic decline in your physical health. Like, for example, post-college, college was a great time. Like, I feel like I learned how to make friends. Like, I was very quiet, reserved, introverted pre-college, like high school, middle school. I was just making games all the time. I had no friends. But in college, I started making friends, started like doing clubs. Like, I helped host a hackathon, all these things that made it very fun and engaging, even outside of games. And then post-college, I was very lonely again. So like my mental health slipped a little. I was like a little sadder, but it meant that like I just stopped working out as consistently or as much. And I just found that like the moment I took control of my fitness routine, I just started being more consistent. I started figuring out like, let me train for like a marathon. I got a lot happier. Like it was like not even just like a little bit more running and a lot more happiness. So like after I did a startup before I started the current company, and this new company I'm a lot happier at, just like culture-wise, people-wise. And I saw that like everything just felt a little easier when I just took a little care of my physical health. So there's this like bi-directional relationship, but it's not equal. It's like one greatly affects the other. So that is something that keep in mind, because I'll talk about it a little more when I talk about the game process and how we built our game. So a lot of why I started Talofa, and Talofa started after we got that like 300K check, was to create games that motivate players to be physically and mentally healthier. Like a lot of Gen Z, including myself, are very shy, anxious. They love games. So what we are doing are making very casual motivators. So something that doesn't feel like you're opening up a fitness app and you're told like take 10K steps. It's more like a gentle nudge in the right direction to get people to just think about moving every day. And that's why I started the studio, is like, this is actually something that can help a lot of people, especially in Gen Z. So the second lesson here is that Gen Z has a lot of new needs and identities compared to prior groups of gamers. Like there are things that they care about, mental health being like a newer, more important one, and physical health, like taking care of themselves, like healthy body, healthy mind, Like these are things that like are important when thinking about what to build for this generation. So third lesson here, I'll actually take you all through the process of how we built a game based on looking at data, looking at surveys, and it's a very daunting process. So essentially what we did is we said, we have a mission. We want to build games that combine physical and mental health. How do we do that? How do we even stand to compete against these large game studios with way more money, way more time in the market? And what we did is we studied top Gen Z games. So like we used a number called MAU, which corresponds to monthly active users. And we looked like this most recent time period, what games really were taking off, what had the most like monthly number of players, since it's just a more accurate count of like how many people are in your game than like a daily active user. Because for example, your app might be featured one day on the app stores and that day you have a huge spike, but it might not mean that the game's actually popular, it just might have gotten temporary attention. So we use MAU and we look at what apps are doing very well. So we used this platform called Sensor Tower, and they show you like what mobile game statistics are in real time. So we looked at all countries, all categories, and we basically got this list of apps within the health and gaming categories, because that is our type of game, is the exact intersection there. And what we did from there was, now we know the top games, can we start doing some interviews, data collection, surveys, and how does that actually turn into a game that we make? And there's something very important to know too, is like just taking the top trends and the data to tell you exactly what to build is not a good way to make a game. Games are half art, half business. So it is important to make sure you know the data, but that can't be the only thing guiding your game creation process, because then you would create something that is too generic or everyone would think of. So there's a little bit of creativity in the process. But at the beginning, we just wanted to know that something that we were making was actually useful to anyone. So we asked questions on like, what do you already use? It's very important to know like what people are already doing, because inventing a new habit is a lot harder than stacking on top of an existing habit. Like the idea of habit stacking is a really important one when it comes to driving change and behavioral change specifically. So we asked everything from like, what type of fitness do you do, already do? How often do you do it? How many steps do you take? And how frequently would you like to walk? And just found slowly like data and pieces of things that told us that we actually started with like all types of fitness, and then we narrowed on like, oh, everyone walks. Walking is important to people. Maybe we should do something around walking. And then 3 months later, after our first survey went out, we just started to make some concepts here, like the idea of like, what are some fake ads we can create? Like just not, we haven't even made these games yet, but if we can try and market them to Gen Z gamers, and if they click on them and the cost to get them to click and download a fake experience is low, that means that the idea likely has a good chance of succeeding. So we took very different ideas, from like drama to pets to exciting action adventure to horror. And we essentially took these, and the one that won is the one in the top right. And it's kind of this action-y, like you're chasing a monster. And the two KPIs, which are key performance indicators that we cared the most about, were click-through rate, CTR, and CPI, which is cost per install. CPI essentially is how much it costs to get somebody from looking at the ad to downloading the entire game and opening it. So that, to us, like we wanted to hit a CPI that was below $2 in the US for iOS platforms, because that means that your game is decently marketable. And click-through rate, we wanted to hit something above 5%, 3 to 5% for the ad click-through rate, because that meant that it was getting people to click on it at a decently industry standard rate too. So those are like a few of the things we looked at when we were looking at new game concepts. And what we did from there is we took that idea that did the best, and then we started to just narrow in. We were like, let's make some fake screenshots. let's make some, like create some fake characters and just invent a game. We hadn't built anything at this point, but we realized that players really loved it. And we talked about cozy, comfy, mystical fantasy, like the idea of like befriending, the idea of like making a home. Like these were all things that like really just got people talking. They're like, this really affects my my heart. Like it appeals to me. It's very unique. And we also realized people love the art. So that was one data point that we got from the many surveys we ran. I think we ran about just under $1,000 on these marketing tests. So it's not super expensive, but we did want to make sure we started to understand like what are the emotions our players are talking about when they talk about our concept. And we also evolved our art because we knew people loved it. So our first sketch here of that little deer to like the middle one to the final one here is the evolution process of like hearing what players loved and just seeing that like cost per install went down as we made the art different. And from there, we essentially landed on our final game, is this game called Where They Live Monster Walk. It's actually launching in 3 weeks as Monster Walk Step Adventure. So kind of funny with the name there, but we had a test name. The test name was Where They Live Monster Walk. But this prototype for us really appealed to the nostalgia, the coziness, the fantasy to help players escape from anxiety, which is kind of back to that first thing of what Gen Z cares a lot about. And what we did is we ended up making the game based on the screenshots. So like what screenshots we saw did the best. We took our creative liberties and we're like, what is a game that serves this player fantasy? Because players expect something when they click on the ad to not be too different from what they clicked on. At this point, mobile games have this interesting dynamic of like fake ads that are super different from the gameplay. But we cared a lot about actually being very true to like what we advertise. And I see a question here about how quickly did we produce the game? How much time did it take to launch after you did the market research? So we actually, the market research happened in January. By October, we had a version of it that had the final art, like was pretty much proved now that it worked. So I would say, yeah, 10 months to get it from concept to polished prototype. But our first prototype went out in June, and we decided we would make the game. I'll just take you through the timeline. So January market research, February surveys, March and April fake ads, May decided on the idea that we would make, June put a version out on the app stores, like a very ugly version. And then by October, it looked like this. So it was like a 10-month accelerated process of like really 6 months concept or research to live in App Store, and then 4 months of constant iteration based on the KPIs we cared about. And the art was done by, we have one artist on our team, so he did all the art. Yeah, I actually, I helped come up with the idea for the characters, but I do not do the art myself. That is one thing I no longer do as a person with a studio. We now have 8 people on our team, so it's not just me. Though I love art, I cannot make art of this high caliber. And essentially what we saw in terms of what are the actual impacts of doing this iteration. So when we first launched the game, it cost $7 to get the game from the ad to somebody's hand. And then over time, we made the art prettier. We changed the look of the game. Like these were our original assets in June. And then we went to this, and that made the cost per acquisition of a user go down to $1.24 to $1.44, which is great. Like that's actually like a really solid cost per install. And what we did is we just iterated on what people were talking about when they talked about why they loved the game. Like they talked about loving the monsters. Specifically, they loved the deer monster. So we actually tried swapping the deer for like this Oni, and then we swapped that for the monkey. And then we determined the winner by the one that costed the least to acquire a new install. And that is how we ended up on this final art and the final cost per install being that low. There is also an important thing to consider is you can acquire a user for very cheap, like they'll install it. But if the user doesn't actually stick around in the game, like they don't spend in the game, or they come in and they play for 1 minute and they're like, this isn't for me, that's not worth the low cost per install either, because maybe you had a really good fake ad, but the gameplay doesn't live up to the expectations. So these are actually cost per installs of quality users. So yeah, it doesn't make sense as an entrepreneur for you to focus on just one stat without understanding what it means. And the actual goal of you as a game developer or app developer is to make sure that the money you can make through the game is higher than the cost of acquiring that user. And here are some of the final shots of one of our gameplay trailers. You can see how the art's really evolved to be like this playful, this very exciting, energizing, adventurous art style. And we just went into early access maybe 2-3 months ago now, I think 2.5 months exactly. And we saw people took 7 million steps, with 8,000 or 4,000 average daily steps and 4 sessions per day, which all to me say that this game is changing people's behavior. People are opening it, they think about it, they care about it, and they're invested in it, and they're literally walking because of it. So we see the hard work of taking that prototype that we made last year, now iterating on the art, making it a full game. A lot of that was worth it with the impact that we see. And the way that we make money in this game is, we have advertisement, but we also have in-game purchases. So things like these characters, maybe you can't actually find one of them in the game, you'll have to purchase her. You'll need to spend to get more resources because you want to build your home better. So it's kind of a hybrid model, and that's very common for mobile games, is you have some rewarded ads and you also have in-app purchases. And we knew that in-app purchase was good for our game because people love the monsters. So whatever people love, you can monetize. Obviously not to make it less fun of a game, but just because they care about it and they want to spend. So that's how we make money from the game. So my third lesson for you all is to pay attention to the emotions that Gen Z uses to describe your game, since it really matters for going into things in order to lower the cost per install, but just making a good game, you need to listen to the players. And I see a question here about more about the gameplay, how you progress in the game. So perfect time. So essentially how the game works is it's a game where your walks, your daily steps, turn into currency that you can use to play the game. It's if you take 4,000 steps, your phone's when you open the app, it says you've taken 4,000 steps. Now you can play the game. And the game is an exploration game. So taking, it takes, for example, here, 25 steps to move up 1 square. So players will use those 4,000 steps that they've accumulated to move around the map. And there are some steps that you can take in the game that might cost more or might be less. Going over a rock might cost 35 steps, but it's small. 25 steps is not a lot, so that we're getting it into people's heads that they can do it. It's not intimidating, it's welcoming. And yes, it has access to the health app. We also connect to your watch, your any smart device. So it all kind of takes the data from even when the app is closed and then feeds it into the game. And this is all through the native APIs that you get access to from Apple and Google. So it's all you get the permission from the player, you access it, we only access step count. So it's all very secure for the player, and it feels like you're getting rewarded for your steps. And that's the feeling we want to give people, that dopamine rush of I have taken more steps equals I can play more game. And that leads them to take more steps. And then the other piece of the gameplay is that you're also collecting little monsters. As you move, you'll find monsters on the map. You might move somewhere and then suddenly you've encountered a monster. And then you'll see one of these little creatures. You can fight them in a little mini game. And then if you win, you collect them. So that's the main loop of the game is walk, explore, battle, collect, and repeat. And you can explore worlds that kind of grow and evolve, and there's mystery and puzzles that you can solve as you explore too. So that's the gist of the gameplay. So my third lesson for you all here is just a case study. Our previous game is a running game. So we're now making a walking game called Monster Walk, which I showed you all about. But the previous game I made was called Run Legends. And this is a case study on just doing just some interesting things we learned from partnering with an organization and doing some studies on how that affected our engagement, retention, ratings even. So we essentially took in our game, it was a game about running. So we had data about how many miles they've run. And what happened was we did a 2-week campaign with a group called the American Red Cross, which they do a lot of efforts around like just disasters and helping support. So they're like a very well-known, respected kind of group. So we did a partnership with them. We kind of put in-game advertisements and talked about how you were running to save the world. And that actually led to us seeing that we 7x'd our revenue. We saw that people were talking about how much they loved that the game that they were playing actually did some good for the world. And that led to us realizing that actually like working with a group can actually help you take your product and advertise it kind of better. So just working with charity in this example was actually like a really interesting case study for us of like taking a game but applying it in a unique place, and then the data helped back that it was worth doing this partnership. So it's just like some interesting ways to get creative with how you distribute and talk about your game. And since our game is good for physical health, like the fact that we are doing good in the world in general was really a appealing thing for our players too. So I would say the lesson here, the fourth lesson, is that Gen Z resonates a lot with like doing good in the world. So there's some games that you can play about like planting trees and just generally like associating with like the idea of like games for good, games for health, games for physical health. Like this is a good way to just elevate your product and your brand and differentiate it. Like there's a lot of games that don't do good. They're just time spent, time suckers. But if you add that little like piece of, and you can also do something good with the game, there's a lot of growth you can get from this that lets you stand out. And the last lesson here on why it was all worth it is like, I didn't get into this to build a company. Like I really just wanted to build games. And the idea of combining fitness and games actually just came out of the contest, and winning that and getting the 300K check and thinking, oh, I should do something about this, or I should not waste this opportunity to try and live my dream. And that turned into this 6-year journey of starting to loaf with this company. With the first game, we got a ton of press. Like at one point we were featured on the App Store and it got close to 6 million impressions, and just people saw my face on the store, and some people still like remember my face from that feature. And it just kind of baffles me that the me who used to like be too afraid to show my face and too afraid to like associate with being somebody who built all these like experimental weird games was actually going to be somebody who was like everyone was seeing. And now I was kind of becoming the face of like fitness and games. So that to me was just a unexpected part of this whole journey, was like realizing people cared. And like it reminded me of back in the early days of building those games and realizing that people actually like cared about the things that I had built. So then that to me, we now get these messages from players who talk about like how they will literally take a sick day from work to play our games, or they'll create this fan art of the game, the characters, the monsters. And just it gives me so much joy that like a game that we initially created based on the data that we had saw actually had the impact that we set out to do. Like the things about how this game got them out of bed, got them up in the morning, like helped them combat their depression, like all these things really helped us feel like we accomplished part of our mission. And for me, I look at this stuff as like, founding a company is really hard. Like sometimes the data looks terrible. Like you're looking at everything, like cost per install went up, like retention went down, like people are no longer spending money. And it's like, why do we do this? Like I revisit these screenshots, this art, and it just reminds me like there was a reason I did this in the first place. And like the ratings we get in the store, like people who say they've lost weight because of the games that we created, like all these things, like for us, like really helped make the journey worth it. And like all the people who told us that like making a fitness game was too hard, it was impossible, just things like that really helped. Like I look back at these and I say like, even if we ended today, like it was worth it. And like my personal journey of going from like a single person studio to building a whole company of like people, humans who work together. Like that picture there is when I did an offsite with my team. And just the fact that we had such a big group of people that wanted to work for me was a dream come true, because I felt like I went from this person who nobody wanted to be friends with to like having a company where people said that it was the best company they'd ever worked at. And my last lesson here is that you can build something no one has seen yet, and it's worth it. Because even if it's scary because it doesn't yet exist in the world, it's definitely something that can lead to a lot of growth, whether like personal, professional, and I just think it's fun to build something that nobody has seen yet or tried yet. So with that, that's pretty much the end of my talk here. But the game Monster Walk is the current game. There's a QR code here to install it if you'd like. And I have my email there as well if you want to talk about anything that I shared here. And I can definitely answer any questions that come up. I see a question here on any new games you're currently working on or supporting and improving the existing ones. So we are currently focusing all our efforts on Monster Walk. So that is, in a way, the new game. It's the version of it's a polished, improved version of the game that I showed earlier, with like the art evolving. Where They Live Monster Walk has turned into Monster Walk. And we're also supporting Run Legends, the existing game. So yeah, we're doing 2 games right now as a team of 8. It's already a lot, but I am thinking about ideas for a 3rd already, because once we launch it, we'll have to figure out what to do next. So yeah, it's been a really fun process of like, we'll always stay within this intersection of like mental health, physical health, and mobile gaming, because it's what matters a lot to me personally. And I would say whatever we work on next is within that intersection. Yeah, so I see another question here about how small indie teams use analytics effectively without a big budget. Yeah, we did our early tests. Like all those surveys that we ran were essentially like $100 studies, or like $400 sometimes, like the fake ads. So it's definitely not something that has to be super expensive. There's also ways you can do it more grassroots. Like you can go out and just interview your friends and family. Like as long as you know that they're your friends and family and will probably tell you things that are nicer than what you want to hear, you can do this for free. You can also sit at like a coffee shop and just talk to people there and just buy them a coffee. So there's very cheap ways to do things. You just have to get a little creative. And I would say the experiments you run just have to be focused rather than high budget. Like we don't have a large budget either, but it definitely helped to know what we were testing as a hypothesis. Another question I see here is, do you organize online presentations of your new games? I don't think we do, but we do talk about the game like on TikTok, on social media. I would say presentations less so, but definitely we're talking about it, trying to spread the word. We just released our game trailer like 2 months ago. So that type of stuff we do like little marketing pushes. And I currently drive marketing on this team, so it is a lot of my personal work too. I see another question about what is the hardest part of running a game developer studio for you. And I would say the hardest part is actually it's not necessarily the game piece. I'd say it's dealing with running a company of people, because I was so used to making games that I forgot that I'm solo as well, that now with a team, I realized everyone has a different picture of the game, like in their head, and everyone is building that idea of like what the game is in their heads. And sometimes that idea is different across the same two different people, even if they're saying the same things, you don't realize that. So I'd say learning to become a good manager is definitely the hardest part, because I did this because I wanted to make games, but I do spend a fair amount of time like looking at doing like admin work, like doing our financial accounting, doing work to make sure that we are not breaking any laws. Like there's a lot of things that you have to consider when you're making a studio and you're more than one person. So I'd say that's the most tricky part. And a question here, will your team make games for PC in the future? I do think so. Like cross-platform play would be very interesting. It's just with health games, we only have access to your step counts if you're on a phone. So that's why it's currently our focus to make mobile games. But yeah, PC I've made games for in the past with my web-based games. And then I see a question here, to learn whether future programmers, current students can test your new games. Yeah, I mean, the current game is going to be out in 3 weeks, but if you email me, I can get you added to the early test group that we have, like a beta program for the early version of the game. So definitely let me know if you want to test it, and I can add you. And we have a mailing list too on our website, talofagames.com, where you can sign up and stay up to date. Question, will you make merchandise for the game? I actually do have some merch that I've mostly sent off to our investors and our own team. So we do have like early merch, but people love the creatures. So yeah, we've been asked to make like plushies, t-shirts. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff I would love to have created for our game once it gets to the point that there's enough people who love it. Because it also doesn't make financial sense to make merchandise when the game has not yet hit a certain scale. So I do use data to inform like, when can we do a big merch push? Like, when does that make sense? And then the question here about, do user plan on using any AI in our games or production process? And we definitely do, not in the art. I think I realized like pretty early on that like AI art, players can spot it. And if they spot it, they get very upset, or they don't necessarily, it just doesn't look good. So because our art is such a big part of why people play the game, we haven't used generative AI for art, but we do use it a lot for programming, for I use it to brainstorm a lot, and production process. Like there's a lot of project management is very tedious. So you can use AI to help automate a lot of stuff, then we've used that so far. But I do think there are more and more AI tools that exist, and they're all just tools. So whatever makes your game the fastest and most effectively, I would use that. And obviously there's a lot of different evolving kind of needs for AI. And yeah, I definitely think that gaming industry changes a lot, and like it's almost like every week there's a new news and new things that happen, new trends. So it is a very intimidating industry to be a part of. It's like entertainment, but I do think it's very much worth it if you love playing games yourself to give it a go. I have a question about any cooperation with NVIDIA. Not right now. Like we don't have really much need for a GPU chip right now, but I'm sure all the AI tools we use are using NVIDIA. And I see a question here about, would you like to make a collab with other games in future? yeah, I do think if there are other games, like something like a Pokemon Go is a perfect example of a game that inspired us, but also would be awesome to collaborate with. There's also a lot of indie titles, like teams that are smaller than ours, same size as ours, that make games that would be really cool to just have like an in-game promotion with. And yeah, it's just a very small community of game developers. So doing any sort of like cross promotion or collab is very fun. And I see another question here about like making language related games and wordplay and interesting idioms. I do think Duolingo is probably the best language related games, though it's not quite a game. It's more an app that has really smart gamification. I do think it is a real problem to learn language and something that would be really cool to work on. But I do think for me personally, language is not necessarily something I'm very knowledgeable in. So probably harder for me to make a good language game than a really good fitness game. But everything's kind of open. I feel like after this Monster Walk game, we have done running, we have done walking, and we'll need to figure something else out to just keep making these like games that get people more mentally, physically healthier. So yeah, it could be something that we consider as well. Yeah, happy to take any more questions. I know we have a few minutes left here. Oh, and I see a comment about, yeah, Duolingo and language learning. Yeah, I definitely think there's a lot of room for that genre to grow, and nothing has yet emerged that is as large as it. And I see a question here on what advice would you give to a young developer? The advice I always give people is to not be ashamed of what you've built and just release stuff. Because like even now, I need to like take my own advice. I get really caught up in like I need to present as super professional. I need to put out something that's perfect. Can't wait until or I cannot have it out before it's like polished, bug free, all of that. I actually think if you're just starting out, it's like way more impressive to a future employer to see that you've actually done things that are out there and playable than one perfect thing that maybe did or did not succeed. And everything's so random sometimes when it comes to games and apps that if you don't put out a lot of tries, a lot of shots on goal, then you actually don't necessarily ever get a shot to break through. So because it's so random, it's worth trying different things, being shameless about just getting it out there and not necessarily moving fast and breaking things, but just being willing to share what you're doing with the world before it's ready. Because if you feel totally ready, it might be too late. Like I always feel like when you release things, it's like slightly early, or I'm like a little embarrassed, or like I know there's something that could have been way better, but I do it anyway. Question here is, have you ever tried to make educational games for schoolers? I have tried to make a game about sorting trash. It was like a very silly game. It was called Hungry Trash, and it was like a game where little monsters were eating trash, and it was all coming on a conveyor belt very quickly, so you had to like quickly sort the trash. And that was the most educational game I'd ever made, but it was like a silly little game that I made in a week, and I ended up getting to show it off at a really big event because it was educational. So there's lots of opportunities for games that are trying to do something different, like not just be a game. So I definitely encourage it as a way to stand out and do something that actually has impact. And I think that was the last question. Cool. Then I think with that, I will say goodbye to you all, and thank you for listening. I always love talking about game development, and it's something that I've lived and breathed my whole life. So definitely reach out if you have any more questions. My email is here. And yeah, just really excited that I got a chance to talk to you all today.